Sorry, I'm getting on real quick and just making sure this volume. I'm just using the basic mic, but I'm still trying to work out a microphone situation. Is that me? I'm still trying to work. Okay, good. Is that me? That was funny. Why is that funny? Even I chuckled. I don't get it, but we all laughed, so therefore there was some humor there somewhere. Oh, all right, so how's everybody doing? Silence. Okay, so we're that bad, huh? How's school going? No, school is not going. School. So is that school is not going well, or school is going to hell, or?
Yes.
No, wow. We're 5 weeks in. It's already dropped a nuke on it. Hopefully not my class. Let me know if you're having troubles. You'll have your grades on the last assignment, a couple of days. How did it go, by the way? Pretty straightforward, easy. No, again?
I sent you a message.
We need to talk.
I sent you a message.
You got a text me.
I did.
I didn't respond.
It was like last night at 11.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll get it.
You said you don't sleep.
Well, just because I don't sleep doesn't mean that. So I'm also a student that was doing homework. I'm not, no joke. So I literally, huge paper I had to write on the crash of 2008 economy. So it's just like, so I apologize. We'll talk about it.
Okay, cool.
Anybody else? Anybody else need me? Well, that's good. All right, so just remember, no tech class, no cell phones, no laptops, no headphones. Everything will be uploaded. You will receive every slide, every word, every picture, every GIF, so on and so forth. So that's why you have to put them away, please. Yeah, that's all I have on that. Sorry, I thought I had something else. So today we're going to discuss the development of the Constitution. A lot of this is going to be review, admittedly. I'm going to provide some information that I almost guarantee you've never heard. But it's because this is on the topic. It's kind of review for you guys. I'll try to push this a little bit more in terms of tempo. But we're going to really just kind of discuss. We discussed 2 weeks ago kind of how American democracy evolved, like where it came from, where all the ideas that had come to pass the United States decided to adopt. Today, we're now going to talk about what and exactly they put into the Constitution, how and why. So I love this video. I hear all the time, not just from students, in fact, primarily from adults, older adults that is, pretty much all there already, but that it's never been this bad in American history. Politics, all they do is yell, they're all negative, all they do is, they're all crap at each other, everybody's just, mean and name calling and blah, 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 blah. I tend to then think to myself, we did go to war once. Maybe that was just a movie I saw. So there's no way it's the worst it's ever been. I'll also argue, and I won't go into this with any detail, but I'll also argue, what we hear in American politics today in terms of rhetoric and what people say, whether politically, that is human, man. I mean, that's just us. That isn't American. That isn't 21st century, 20th century. That is, you're a human being. You have a brain. You've got a mind of your own. And when you feel confident about something, and when you feel attacked on something, you're going to respond. Well, that's not unique to you. You are unique to the world, but that kind of response is human. Remember, who is it? Cain killed Abel? Was it the first murder in human history? We do this kind of stuff all the time. It's just it's a kid killing. We do that all the time. I also want to argue, too, that what we think is bad in the United States, it's nowhere near the worst in the world. I love this song. Now this did happen. This happened once in American history, 1860. It's been a while. We've never had a wrestling. That's like WWE stuff. That guy's good. What has ever set a fire? You know, basketball, I swear that's young age. It isn't really. I love basketball. Notice though how he doesn't put down the flowers. He's like, perfect gift for my life. And then he looks at it, it's like, so I do have one. So, okay, I literally just said that our kind of discourse with one another is very human. And obviously, you know, it's not like we never see fights here in the United States. It's just that our congressmen generally don't. And I have one theory as to why they don't. They're so old. Our president has been at post-retirement age for 2 decades. Our Speaker of the House is older than him. Who are they fighting? They want to believe it. They want to fight. I guarantee it. Like, they look at each other like Republicans. They just want to beat each other down. But they're just so old. They're like, I have the strength. Then what they do is they text each other and just go, I'll have my security meet your security behind the Capitol where there's no cameras. And then just the security dukes it out. And then they kind of feel good because they got a brawl. All right, so today we're going to explain the social, economic, and political influences on the United States Constitution. Let's start with the development of the Constitution. Oh, crap. Hold on. I hope this has been on the whole time. It looks like it. All of a sudden, I can see my desktop, and that's not good. It's making a lot of noise, too. Okay, hopefully you guys are there. All right, so develop the Constitution. Very quickly, democracy is a number of things, but essentially the word breaks down to, or I shouldn't say breaks down, it is essentially defined by rule of the people. It just means that we, the ruled, are the rulers. So generally, the majority rules. There are some exceptions to that on occasion. If you've ever heard of a filibuster in the Senate, I mean, basically the minority can kind of take control there in certain instances, but generally the majority rules. What it means too in terms of democracy is it means citizen voter enfranchisement, which means that we are enfranchised. We are given the power, the opportunity to participate in our government, something that is, even to this day, I mean, it's not rare, but it is still fleeting. We, in democracy, have the power to select our leaders. Our leaders do not select themselves, which is what you have in totalitarian dictatorships, those kinds of regimes that you have in monarchies, which you generally have in theocracies. It obviously that means citizen office holders. It means that any citizen has the opportunity through democracy to rise to a position of office. You're not born into the position of office. In other words, you don't have a lineage like a king would. I mean, a king's firstborn son is next in line to the throne. I mean, it's just kind of the way it works. They are free, democracy, you are free to assemble, you are free to speak out, speak up about anything, and then free to criticize those in power, you're free to speak out against anybody. Again, not something, I suppose you can hypothetically do that in a monarchy, when so long as the monarch isn't a totalitarian thug that's going to murder you for speaking out. But essentially, in any totalitarian dictatorships, if you speak out against that leadership, you will disappear. I mean, it's just kind of, that's how they rule. They rule by fear. We're not supposed to be ruled by fear in a democracy. So we talked a little bit about social contracts last week. And so what the United States founding fathers set up in regards to this Constitution was based on the idea that we would create a social compact with one another and then follow that compact generation after generation. And so this compact, essentially, we're speaking from a thematic kind of perspective. I'm not quoting the Constitution anymore, but the ideas are what we're placing in the Constitution. Is this compact stated that we have a right as people, as citizens, to choose those who govern us, hence the democracy angle. We have a right to change those who govern when they no longer govern according to the people. So that is, in essence, revolution, but in a democracy, it's revolution via election. And then government power, according to a traditional social compact, government power should be divided by checks and balances. Now, ironically, if you were to take my world history class today, literally today, which I teach 3 to 5 o'clock, don't come up, I talk about this in particular, Machiavelli. All right, so what was the first government of the United States? It was the Articles of Confederation. Who was the first president of the United States? Take about 30 seconds. I know this isn't easy. Want social distance talk to your neighbors. First president of the United States. Ready, set, go. All right, this is an easy one. I'm not saying like calling one, we all just say it out loud. So on the count of 3, who's the first president of the United States? 1, 2, 3. John Hanson. Who? George Washington. Who said that? He was like 13. Your 8th grade civics teachers would be so disappointed right now. That is really bad and taught you the wrong. Oh my gosh. So you guys, John Hanson, right? I mean, should be on the dollar bill, was supplanted by that Washington guy. Should be on the, on what's the monument in North Dakota, South Dakota? Rushmore. Should be on Mount Rushmore. Supplanted. I don't know. Yeah, you guys better have that podcast. John Hanson was the first president of the United States. Served from November 5th, 1871 through November 3rd, 1872, a full 1-year term. Elias Boudinot was the 2nd president of the United States. Thomas Mifflin, 3rd. I know these names are coming back to you guys now, so that's cool. Then there was a brief president time when we didn't have a president. It was only about a month, so the country survived. Then our 4th president was Richard Henry Lee. Then again, 17 days without a president, that's cool, we'll survive. Then John Hancock, remember him? I mean, President of the United States, good. That's why you know. Nathaniel Gorman, Arthur St. Clair, Cyrus Griffin. Cyrus gets no credit. That name really should be one of the most popular names in American Day. I named my 2nd born son Cyrus after him. So, okay, I'll review, right? I told you to review. We know this. Vanessa's like. So, who was the first president of the United States? One of the 13 colonies finally agreed upon the Articles of Confederation in 1871, which was the first formal government of the United States. That was the governing charter that brought the 13 colonies together. The United States was born. But so remember, 1776 declared independence. 91 was when the Constitution was ratified, but the government, which then organized the United States as an entity, was actually formalized in 1781 under the Articles of Confederation. The colonies elected their first president under the organized powers of the Articles, who was, of course, John Hanson of the state of Maryland. His full title was President of the United States in Congress assembled. Congress voted to provide Hanson with a house, with servants, and rules that, quote, he takes precedence of all and every person in the United States. And again, he served one full term. With Hanson as president, Congress established the Treasury Department, which still stands in existence today, adopted the Great Seal of the United States, which is still in use today, and made the fourth Thursday of every November, quote, a day of Thanksgiving. Abraham Lincoln has usurped the greatness that was John Hanson. Look at that face. The great John Hanson, first president of the United States of America. Well, not quite. So, essentially, why is George Washington the first president of the United States? He's the first president of the United States under the Constitution. The Constitution, that is our governing charter today, is the second government in our history. The Articles of Confederation was first. And how the Articles of Confederation worked, were the states actually held the greatest power over the government, not over the organization of government, not the federal government. So the states then selected a Congress through elections. Then the Congress created a committee of states, which was kind of like an executive committee. The Congress selected a president, hence why his title is actually President of the United States in Congress assembled. He was not elected by the people because the states, it wasn't relevant to them. The Congress elected the president, and essentially the president just presided over everything. He really had very little formal executive kind of autonomous authority. And then the Congress selected civil committees and civil officers that kind of served as your secretaries of, so to speak. So very, very briefly, let me just skim through this. Don't write this down. I'm going to hand you everything. The order is important. So again, the states retained their independent political authority over the federal government. There's no centralized federal government. That is also a big flip between the government we have now in the Constitution. The federal government is the big guy over the states in terms of the order of power in the United States. Under the Articles, it was the other way around. The states were the big guys in terms of who had the most power between the relationship of federal and state, or federal and state. So in terms of Congress, there was a one house assembly, meaning there was no House and Senate, it was just one house of state representatives. Each state possessed one vote, which meant population be damned. Virginia might have been big, Rhode Island small, but it didn't matter. They each held equal power in regards to their federal representation. The president was appointed by Congress to preside over meetings. Kind of, again, symbolic. He was important to them, but he really held no formal executive authority the way a president does today. There was no such thing as an executive order to say, we're going to stop building the wall, boom, it's over. There was nothing like that. Civil committees were appointed by Congress to manage general affairs under the direction of Congress. So again, that's your secretaries of, your secretary of state, your secretary of treasury, yada, yada, yada. And the committees of the states consisted of one delegate from each state appointed by Congress. They were authorized to act on the wishes of Congress while Congress was in recess, which, as you can see, these wide gaps happened with some regularity, where Congress would just be adjourned, there'd be no formally functioning government. So they would tell the committee of states, this is what needs to be accomplished while we're adjourned, and essentially we'd go back home for a period of time. And then when they came back, then Congress then retained the formal authority. So some of the accomplishments that the Articles of Confederation, that the government under the Articles of Confederation were able to reach. They led the American people through the Revolution. This is the government that executed the war successfully, and also negotiated the Treaty of Paris, which legally ended the war. So, I mean, of course, there was an armistice. That was when Great Britain raised the white flag to the Kipper done fighting. And so all that did was end hostilities. The formal end of the war came a couple years later with the Treaty of Paris. And that's then when, you know, the peace accord was signed. That's when England gave up rights to land. That's when the United States gained formal recognition by England, so on and so forth. The Articles of Confederation kept the 13 states together until they were ready to accept a stronger plan of union, the Constitution, which we'll get into in a second. It laid down the foundation for America's later expansion westward by the sale of public land, which was continued under the Constitution, and planned for governments for the new territories. So when the war ended and peace was signed in England, the United States gained a tremendous amount of north-central, Midwest, actually. North-central is the thing here. Midwest and Northeastern territory, Northwestern territory, excuse me. And those would have to be organized at some point to provide territorial boundaries and give them opportunities for governance. In terms of weaknesses, though, there is no formal executive or judicial branch. So again, president, executive means to execute the laws. So Congress passes the laws, the president enforces them. It didn't really work that way. There was also no judicial branch. So if there's a problem between states, they go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kind of adjudicates. There was no such thing. If the states, without a judicial branch, had gotten into a tiff with one another, that meant civil war. Congress did not have the power to tax. Think about that. When they're executing a war, the Congress is the one who's really, constitutional Congress under the Articles are the ones that are kind of formally prosecuting the war, but they couldn't tax the states to pay for it. All they could do is request that the states gave them money. And if the states said no, the Congress had no power to enforce. The currency regulation in money printing was given to both Congress and states, which meant that there would be a federal coinage and then a state coinage. So if you lived in, say, Virginia, you could have both federal coin and Virginian coin, which just complicated things in terms of trade. Congress cannot regulate, speaking of trade among the states or foreign countries. It was up to the states. So under this circumstance, France, for instance, with 13 new states, would have had to develop 13 individual trade treaties with the states. There was not one trade treaty with the United States, there was one per state. So imagine if that was still the case today. States like, nations like France, England, they'd have to have 50 different trade treaties, which means if, say, Arizona just doesn't quite get along with England, now Arizona doesn't have a trade treaty, but the other 4 United States do. I mean, it would have been super, super complicated that way. And finally, 9 of the 13 states had to approve a measure before it could be passed by Congress, which is a 3/4 measure. Today, it's generally for most things just 50% plus 1. And all 13 were required to amend the Articles of Confederation. In other words, unanimous consent, which means if one state decided, we're not going to like it, boom, could not amend the Constitution, could not amend the Articles. So those are some of the very true weaknesses. So going to social justice, talk to neighbors, I'll bring this back up. What, in your mind, was the greatest flaw of the Articles of Confederation and why? What was the greatest flaw? Social justice, talk to neighbors, ready, set, go.
But also
What is the, just in your opinion, what is the greatest weakness, or what's the greatest weakness of the Articles of Confederation? Hey, let me just shout it out there.
Amending.
Amending, the fact that they would need three-quarters, there would be three-quarters of the states basically, or unanimous vote. Yeah, so again, today in the House, or excuse me, today in Congress, the Constitution, you just need 50% plus one. The plus one just means you have to break the tie. You can't have a tie. If there is a tie, then it's a no, essentially. And then to amend the Constitution, it's two parts. It's 2/3 of both houses of Congress and then 3/4 of the states. But at least it's not unanimous. It's very difficult to do, and it should be, but it isn't unanimous. Well, so it's the biggest weakness of the Articles of Confederation.
Not having an executive or judicial branch.
Not having an executive judicial branch, yes, you don't have anyone to execute, to carry out the laws that Congress is passing, and the judicial branch to be able to discuss, adjudicate or become an ombudsman in regards to confrontation and disagreements. Anybody else? Or if the state or government of some kind is actually breaking the law, you have anybody to go to. Anybody else? Everybody to group talk about.
We talked about like the currency one would be pretty bad, like not knowing like what they would use. And then also the free one after people are regulated. What's coming in and out.
Yeah, it would be very difficult. It would be difficult for governors too, if you think about it, again, 50 states, so France would have to have 50 trade deals. But think of a governor having to deal with, with leaders of other nations, and it would all just be very difficult. Anybody else? What else? Who says the no formal executive judicial branch? 6 of you guys, it looks like. Who said Congress does not have the power to tax? 4 of you guys? I would honestly say that that's kind of a big deal. That's really a big one. Who says currency regulation? 3, 5 of you guys. Who says trade? Vanessa? Who said each state had only one vote in Congress? Yeah, we don't care about that, do we? Who says the approval of measures or the amending the articles? Jane, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, that would be very, very tough. Beautiful. So now let's figure out how they got rid of it. Essentially, they committed treason. A lot of these guys committed treason, not once, but twice. They committed treason with the British government when they declared independence, and they committed treason again when they went in to simply throw out a government that they had already agreed upon, that is the Articles of Confederation. And they knew it. They did. They recognized, hey, we're committing treason against our nation, but in both cases it was necessary, at least from our perspective. You can ask the British what they think. But so the Constitutional Convention was called, and initially it was simply calls to improve the Articles of Confederation. Because again, to throw it out would in essence be treasonous. You're saying our government is broken, let's just throw it out and start a new one. People were saying that about a month ago, and what word is thrown around for those protesters? They're treasonous. Well, then so was Thomas Jefferson, not once but twice. So was John Adams, not once but twice. So was George Washington, not once but twice. And those guys are patriots. They were literally on currency. John Adams isn't, but so 1787 Constitutional Convention was called. Delegates from all 13 states joined. Well, not quite. 12 of the 13 states. Rhode Island didn't attend. Can anyone just speculate, guess right now, why wouldn't Rhode Island attend? I'll give you a hint. The answer is on this page right here. Wait. Yes, the answer is on this page right here. Why would Rhode Island attend the Constitutional Convention? Smallest population, so what might have happened? They wouldn't have only one vote. They recognize Virginia wants more power. And if Virginia gets more power, it's at the expense of smaller states like Rhode Island. So screw you guys. We're not going to play your game. So they literally said no, sent no delegates. So 55 delegates in total attended. It should have been a few more, but of course Rhode Island didn't get there. So what were the issues that were dividing these founding fathers and Americans in general? First, powers of federal government. The question was, would the states retain significant power, which had been the role of, had been the organization of power under the Articles, or the federal government have more power? Then it was representation of Congress, for the very same reason why Rhode Island did not attend. Let me just sort of tear it. For the very same reason why Rhode Island did not attend, the question was, how many members in Congress would each state get? Small states want equal representation. Large states want a proportional representation, i.e., more representation in Congress based on the population. Virginia being a large state wanted more of a voice. I suppose that's kind of a fair thought. Slavery was then the number 3 biggest issue. How would they deal with that? When slaves continued to be counted, when slavery even exists in the United States. And obviously it had under the Articles of Confederation. So there were 2 very specific plans that were called, or that were presented. Oh, and by the way, I'll take one very quick step back. So again, these representatives came to amend the Articles of Confederation. They did not come to throw out the Articles of Confederation. How did we get to the point where we were throwing it out and creating a new government? Well, pretty simple. Alexander Hamilton walked in on day 1. They called it to order and said, I have a new government plan, Virginia plan, dropped it down, changed the conversation right there. Instantly, he just said, hey, we're going to throw it up, we're going to do this. And boom, the debate started. Well, what about this? Let's talk about it. Changed the entire course of the conversation. So the Virginia plan, of course, called for a new national government. It was to throw out the Articles of Confederation. It was not to amend it, it was to say, yeah, it did its job, it sucked, it's done, throw it out, newer is always better, so says Barnes Stinson. It would have 3 branches of government, a legislative branch, which of course the Articles had, a strong executive branch, and a strong judicial branch, neither of which the Articles had. Representation in the legislative branch would be based on population, which is why Rhode Island wasn't there. Think about it, Virginia was very populous, so of course they said, hey, give us the power. Large states liked it, small states did not. So how did the small states counter? They countered with the legislative plan. The legislature would have 1 house. Each state would get 1 vote, similar to the Articles of Confederation. Small states thus like the plan. We have equal power as the big states in Virginia. Of course, the large states hated it. Why? They lost out on that power. So, being that the nation was kind of split 50-50 in regards to large states and small states, there had to be a compromise. Compromise was very simple. The legislature would have 2 houses, not just 1. The House of Representatives and the Senate. The House would be proportional, which gave the larger states power. The Senate would have 2 senators. So regardless of population, they had equal authority, giving the small states a voice. And then all bills would have to pass both houses to get to the president. If it passes one and not the other, it is dead in the water. If you want it to pass both, fix it. Compromise. Let the large states and the small states come together. Now, ironically, today, because of political parties, it has nothing to do with large states and small states. It's all blue versus red. So take California, for instance, 54, 55 congressmen, or 53 congressmen, and take New Jersey, which has like 9 or something like that. It might be a little bit more, like 13, somewhere 15 maybe, regardless, but much smaller. They both are blue states, so they tend to elect far more blue Democrats. So the size no longer matters in regards to power. It all has to do with party. Then the slavery issue, which was, of course, the hardest of the three. The southern states refused to approve the Constitution unless slavery continued. They said, fine, executive branch, great judicial branch, sure, 2 houses of Congress. We get slavery, we won't. And that was it. We get slavery or we won't. Due to the proportional population rules for members of the House, southern states, ironically, wanted their slaves to be counted. Why? Because there are a lot more slaves in those states than there were masters. In some counties, 10 and 20 to 1. In other words, mathematically, 10 to 20 slaves to every 1 non-slave. They wanted them counted because they couldn't vote too, so just give us the power and give us the authority. So by doing so, by counting slaves, this would raise the population of each of those states, giving them more representatives in the House. If they didn't count their slaves, a state like Georgia might get 5 representatives in the House. With slaves, they might get 13. Huge discrepancy there, a lot more power with 13 than just 5. Here's the great, sick irony of it all. These slaves were considered property. They were no different to a master than a table. And yet here, they wanted them counted as human beings. Why? For power. So, again, the southern states said, we get slavery or we walk, and the nation needed to remain united. If the southern states had walked, if the northern states, who had all but abolished slavery at this point in its entirety, if the northern states had put their foot down and said, no, we are not starting a nation that includes slavery, the South walks, they form their own country, the northern states form their own country, they are not united. What's the first thing that's going to happen? England is coming right back. England would then put literally a military peg between two. They would take out the southern states first, conquer them, turn north, conquer the north. Game over. The United States was an experience that lasted 2 years. I said experience, an experiment that lasted 2 years. The North knew this and knew we have to give in to some degree. So what was their compromise? The compromise was, of course, I'm sure you studied from junior high, the 3/5 compromise. And that is that slaves would not count as one full human being, but would count as 3/5 of a vote. So from 5 members in the House to 13, it dropped down to about 9 or 10. But 9 or 10 voices in the Senate and in the House was twice as many as 5, so they accepted, the South accepted. So then the Constitution stated that Congress could not ban the slave trade until 1808. I believe it was January 1st, 1808. Guess what Congress did on January 1st, 1808? They banned the slave trade. And at that point, the clock was ticking. The Civil War was coming. They knew back then too, by the way. The Civil War did not sneak up on anybody. The Civil War was coming from 1781. They knew it. They knew a war would be fought with slavery as being one of the primary issues. So it was, we kind of look back and go, gosh, how come they didn't do anything? They did. They bided their time until that war came. And then 650,000 Americans sacrificed their lives on either side, regardless, 650,000 Americans died. More than every other total of American deaths in every other war fought in American history combined. So, what would this form of government be? Remember, no tech or I'll just ask you to leave. You're going to just be on your phones. There's no point in being here. Alright, so some of the primary themes of federalism. Federal government has expressed power as defined by the Constitution. In other words, their power is expressly given. It is very clearly illustrated. All government power, therefore, that is not specifically given to the federal government is reserved for the states. So that's essentially federalism, is that the federal government's power is expressly and clearly illustrated in the Constitution. This is what you are and are not allowed to do. Everything else not mentioned here goes to the states for them to decide on a state-by-state basis. Sure, 2-3 states can have similar ideas and handle something, but in the end, it's still one state making a decision for themselves. So unionists or federalists argue for broad federal power, and they support a strong central government. This would be akin to a modern-day Democrat who tends to support larger government initiatives. States' rights activists or anti-federalists argue for narrow federal power and strong state or decentralized power. What does decentralized mean? It just means every state gets to decide. It's not one entity deciding for everyone. Makes sense? So that's really the two arguments. And of course, the Constitution is federal. It sets up a federalist system in which the federal government has that strongest power. So the powers of government are enumerated. As I said, these are the powers specifically delegated to the Congress. And again, anything else goes to the states. Concurrent, these are powers shared by both the state and federal governments, or federal and state governments, excuse me. Reserved, that's the everything else. Those are held by the states and not granted to the federal government. And I can give you examples on all of these right now, so don't worry. And then implied powers. These are powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, but also not prohibited by the states, and are therefore reserved to the states. I'll tell you this though, in these instances, the states quite often tend to give up that power to the federal government. This is just kind of a nebulous leftover. Like, hey, this is all clear, this is all clear, this is all clear. What about this? And then just kind of, the governments kind of just deal with those, the implied powers, on an issue-by-issue basis. So, enumerated powers, these again are the powers specifically given to the federal government, nothing else. Examples are national defense. Arizona cannot declare war on Mexico. Currency. Arizona cannot mint its own currency. That is strictly the federal government. Post offices. The federal government designates where post offices go. They're the ones in charge of your mail. Physical mail. Foreign affairs, that's again trade, peace deals, trade, I just said trade. Border issues, like any, friendships, enemies, so on and so forth, all federal government. And interstate commerce, that is, again, trade deals with other nations specifically. Concurrent powers, again, these are shared by both the federal government and the states. Both the federal government and the states can lend and borrow money. The federal government borrows money every second of every day. Most states do the same. And a lot of states borrow from the federal government. Taxation, both the federal government and the states can tax. That's why when you guys get jobs, a lot of you don't do, but if you look at your check, you'll see you had federal taxes pulled, you had state taxes pulled, you often have county taxes pulled, and then you have the local city taxes pulled. All four of those. So both the federal government and the states and the local governments all have the right and authority to tax you on what you make. It's shared that all governments have law enforcement. Federal government law enforcement is basically, the military, but then the FBI. State level, we obviously have police, which is generally those. You'll have county sheriffs and then you'll have city police. States don't actually have law enforcement per se. Both can charter banks, although the United States federal government hasn't chartered a bank in 200 years. They did charter two, but states can charter banks. And then transportation, of course. We have interstate highways, and then we have interstate highways. It's the difference between the I-17 and the 202. The I-17 will take you from California to Florida. The 202 will just circle you around the valley. Reserve powers, these are held by just the states. So an example of the chartering a local government So in other words, if you wanted to start a town, you would reach out to the state and you would just have their land, you set the governments or legislature, whatever. If you call the federal government and said, I want to start a town, they'd be like, we can't. We have no power, we have no authority, who would we even transfer it to? There's no entity there. Education, the federal government has no role in education. And then you say, well, what is the Department of Education? Well, that's a gigantic carrot at the end of a stick. They, again, have no authority over education. So how does the federal government get around it? They give the Department of Education money, and then they say, and then the Congress will say, this is what we want you to do with this money. And the states, the Department of Education goes to the states and said, here is money, do what we want. Have you ever turned down free money? The states generally don't. And then, if the state says, no, we don't want your money because we don't want to do what you're telling us to do, then the Congress says, oh, that's totally cool. Reserve powers, baby, rock on. We're going to take your highway funding from you. And so now you have to pay for highways. And so states go, all right, fine, we'll take your money, we'll teach them this crap that you want us to teach. And our students get dumber and dumber. I'm not pointing. Back to our conversation. Yes. Inside joke. They're not dumb, they're quite intelligent, second class. States register you to vote. So you don't register with the federal government to vote, you register with your state. That's why, you're registered in Arizona to vote. You move to California, you have to re-register in California. Your registration is not universal. And then again, intrastate commerce. So the states, if Arizona wants to have a trade deal with California, they can. They don't have to go to the federal government. And the federal government can't tell Arizona to start a trade deal with California. And then finally, the doctrine of implied powers. So in addition to powers expressly granted to the federal government, they may also exercise incidental power. So again, while technically anything that's, there's these three chunks and there's everything left over. Technically, everything left over is supposed to be given to the states, and sometimes the states will take powers, but it's an issue-by-issue basis. Essentially, the federal government will kind of just take over and just kind of we're going to deal with this, and so the states that kind of stay out of it. So there's no constitutional exclusion to implied powers. It's just they both just decide what we do when an issue comes up. It's just generally all covered. These instances do not happen fairly often. All right, so in your mind, what is the most important power of the United States federal government and why? So this often gets confusing responses. Basically, what is the most power of these and others that are given specifically to the federal government? So what is the most important power of the federal government? Take about 1 minute. Social distance, Dr. Nevers. I say go. Oh, good. I didn't press mine. Oh, so Taylor made a fantastic point. You said the most important power of the federal government is money. Why? Everything, doesn't it? And consider again, as I mentioned before, how complicated it would be if every state had their own currency to go along with American currency. The example that I often give in that case is, imagine if all the states had their own currency and you wanted to do just a short road trip, around kind of set of 4 corner states. My youngest sister and I did this 3 Christmases ago. We just did a 4-corner trip, went up to Utah, into Colorado, down to New Mexico, and came home. Just, fun, like 4-day thing. If every state had their own currency, I would have taken my Arizona dollars. When we got into Utah, I would have had to have gone to a bank, transferred, or traded in my Arizona dollars for Utah dollars. Then when we went to Colorado, would have had to take my Utah dollars and changed it into Colorado dollars. Then when we came down into New Mexico, which thankfully there's like nothing there, but we did stop in Santa Fe. I would have had to trade in my, exchange my Colorado dollars for New Mexico dollars. Then come back from Arizona or into Arizona, would have had to exchange my New Mexico dollars for Arizona dollars. Would have been a gigantic pain in the butt. But fortunately, we have universal currency. I went into New Mexico, Utah, spent money there, no big deal. Went to Colorado, spent money there, no big deal. Probably spent a little bit too much money, we had a lot of fun. So, went down to New Mexico, spent no money, money was, it's not a big deal, came home, broke. But we had a blast. So just, I would imagine it would be really complicated. And we are fortunate out here in the Southwest, no matter what state you live in, it's a pretty big state. So when you do some traveling, you can often just travel within your state. You wouldn't have to, exchange currency very often, unless you left state lines. Think about the New England area. Those states are so small, they're literally the size of or smaller than Arizona counties. Maricopa County is larger than the state of New Jersey. But think about that. So you would have to, if you worked, within any of those states, and did any trouble, you'd be exchanging your currency constantly. Hence the beauty and importance of currency. What else? What's the most important power the federal government holds? National defense? Yeah. Do you really want, what do people call the governor of California? Isn't it like King, what do they call him? What's his name? Space analyst. Okay, so King, they call him King Newsom. There's, well, so you want Gavin Newsom and Doug Ducey declaring war on Canada? Well, okay, now Canada deserves it, but I think she's like, yep.
Should have taken the
What should have George Washington blew it, man?
But they blew the capital? Why did someone
Take them out. Canada should be ours. What else? National defense. The United States did have an incursion into Ontario, and we lost. We couldn't take an Ontario. You take Ontario, you take it. There's nobody there.
It's so nice.
What else? They speak French. You know, great. So, who agrees with national defense? Number one. Good have you. Who agrees with currency? Oh, wow, then your leader, your representative leader just walked out. So, okay, so the majority of you guys say, who says foreign affairs? And foreign affairs is a big deal. Renee is a little bit. Who says interstate commerce? Now, I didn't think, Matt, I made a mistake, Matt, right? I made a mistake. A few moments ago, I said intrastate, and I said Arizona, California. That is incorrect. Interstate is Arizona, California. That's why the federal government deals with those. The federal government will broker those deals. So I made a goofball mistake. Intrastate is Peoria and Phoenix. You know, it's Glendale and Mesa coming up with just, you know, figuring out how to lay out the light rail, you know, between certain towns or build a freeway that's going to connect cities, that kind of thing. Federal government has nothing to do with that. That is all a state power. So if Arizona and California wants to make a deal, the funny thing is, as I was saying it, I was thinking the Colorado River in my head, because the Colorado River is very important to Arizona, very important to Nevada, very important to California, and very important to Colorado, obviously. And in my head, I'm going, yeah, the federal government brokers that deal, brokers, you know, who gets what water, because otherwise California would just steal it all. True story, they've tried on several occasions. It's gone to the Supreme Court, in fact, it's not even an exaggeration. So that's why the federal government gets involved. Intrastate, you know, Peoria and Phoenix want to build a highway. Nobody's going to go to the president and go, hey, we're going to build a highway. They're like, yo, I have a bigger fish to fry. You know, my vice president's trying to take me out. I'm kidding. I'm joking. So now here is full-on review. Let me fly to this, and we're basically done. So, what are the three branches of government? Executive, our president, and, you know, vice president and his staff, you know, the secretaries and so forth. Judicial is the Supreme Court and the lower courts, and the legislative, which is, of course, the Congress, your House, and your Senate. So we know this, hopefully, and hopefully you learn this in, like, third grade. So again, I'm going to fly through here. If you want to hear my notes, that's fine, but I mean, come on, I hope this is like 100% review. And again, if you need the notes, it's going to be on loud cloud in just a couple of minutes. So the legislative branch of Congress, they're crucial roles, shared power, and that's part of it is to control presidents. Now, when I wrote this, Obama was still president, and like he was starting to really take advantage of the whole executive order thing. And then Trump became president and really started to take advantage of the whole executive order thing. And now Biden's president, and he looks like he's going to blow both Obama and Trump out of the water with this whole executive order thing. And Congress doesn't seem to care. They don't seem to get in the way. They're like, hey, this is our job. No, no, I got it. Let me just sign this piece of paper, and the country changes. You know, so their job is supposed to be to control the president, but you know, executive orders are now kind of like, they're seriously. This is no joke. I'm not joking, I'm certainly not picking on Biden, because presidents are performing. Presidents are becoming lowercase d dictators. That is not an exaggeration. This whole executive order thing, it's fine, it works, it serves a purpose, but it's supposed to be for emergencies. Now everything is emergency. Oh my gosh, my shoe was untied, the executive order, bam, shoe. I mean, it's like, this is becoming a thing. So bicameralism moderates partners, big bicameralism, there's a House and a Senate. It does moderate partisanship, and it helps to clear up possible error. And the error would just be the House is just, being very, very, very facetious. The House is full of a bunch of nutballs. They're passing all these bills that are just like crazy, and of course they cannot become law unless the Senate agrees. So the Senate just doesn't pass them. So it moderates. It kind of staves off some of the really strange that can possibly go through. Now it still happens, especially when both houses are controlled by the same party, and certainly can happen with even greater efficiency when that same party is in control of the White House. And then, of course, the president now with executive orders can kind of go around them, but still, by being two houses that can kind of control, and we can kind of moderate. Their functions, of course, representing us, lawmaking, consensus building, supposedly. Overseas bureaucracy, that's the Senate. Policy clarification and investigating. I mean, they're investigating Trump right now with this whole, what's the word? Okay, it's basically impeachment stuff. It's Never before in history has anybody, as a private citizen, ever been impeached, but I guess we're gonna try. They're coming up to you next year. The Senate also confirms appointments and ratifies treaties. Manages workload through leadership system, most of the work done subcommittees, blah, blah, blah. Okay, executive order. They're supposed to have limited powers by design, of course. Again, this whole executive order thing. Biden was bragging, I've got a stack 6 inches thick of executive orders. That should scare everybody because the next president could be Republican. He's going to go, I've got a stack 12 inches thick. Now we're starting to really compare stacks here. Those are all like, it's a big deal. Constitution is unclear at times over which branch has power, and this is why the president kind of will wield power because it's just one guy or girl, obviously, versus 535. He manages the government with his White House staff. Americans expect a great deal from presidents, which is true. It's actually a little unfair and it's scary because we expect so much from the president. We expect presidents to now act like lowercase t dictators. That's, they're kind of like, it's what people want. If we don't really complain, they're just going to keep going. People do complain, just obviously presidents are having a lot of fun. Presidents and Congress have a special relationship. They, obviously the Congress writes the laws, the president enforces them. The president functions as the commander-in-chief, diplomat-in-chief, administrator-in-chief, blah, blah, blah. And then the judicial branch, the Supreme Court. They are a powerful check on Congress. Why? Because if Congress passes a bill and the president signs the law, that is just, there's no power for them to do so. The Supreme Court is supposed to then say, nope, it is, quote, unconstitutional. They strike the law. And this doesn't happen very often because Congress, there are 2 reasons very quickly. Congress knows kind of like how to work around that kind of stuff. And the Supreme Court also doesn't like to get involved. They try to be involved as infrequently as possible. So they deal with other things. But so they are limited by president. There's 3 levels of the federal court system. The Supreme Court, the district courts, of which there are 9, and then the appeals courts. That's out of order. Supreme Court last. Or district court. District courts are the lower one. That's why it's out of order. Appeals courts are number 2, and then Supreme Court is number 3. So it's supposed to go from small to large. I just wrote that one. So I used to work, I told you, for the United States Congress, and I asked my boss, Congressman Quayle, once something. It was just like, what happens in the event of blah, 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 blah? And he goes, there's always an appeals court. And so that line has always stuck with me. What he means is that if I am charged with something, or if I sue somebody and I lose, then I can appeal in state, locally. I can appeal. And I can eventually make it up to the state Supreme Court. And if I lose, I can't appeal to a federal court. I can go to federal district court. And if I lose, I can appeal to the appellate court, the Circuit Court of Appeals. And if I lose, I can appeal once more to the Supreme Court. Now, whatever the Supreme Court says stands. So that is the end. But when it says there's always an appeals court, there are there's a lot of levels between state and federal. So you've got a lot of chances to finally get someone to agree with you, and then just hope that the losers don't appeal and find a way to win. So the Supreme Court controls the cases that it hears, and that's why I say that the Supreme Court's, they're the deciding voice. Well, they decide in one of 2 ways. 1, they hear the case and they rule on it. Or 2, they refuse to hear the case, in which case the next highest court, the Circuit Court of Appeals, their ruling holds firm. So if the Supreme Court, if you take something all the way to the District Court of Appeals and you lose, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. But if the Supreme Court says, no, your case isn't worthy of our time, then boom, the appellate court becomes the final rule. All right, so what say you? What is the most important branch of the United States government? Why? Just as review, there's 3 branches. What is the most important branch of the federal government? And why? Social distance stopping everything. I say go.
They don't take each other. Especially just what happens. They're so different. The each one.
There's still 14 people there. I'm so proud. I'm legitimately proud of those 14. So here, I'll take it. Help this. You know the thing that drives me most nuts about these things? It's honestly, I'm so used to that now. It's watch what happens, watch my hair. That drives me nuts. And I'm so much product in my hair right now. Yeah, I know. So I don't care what you're saying.
There's like a purple mark on my wall right now before I slept.
Okay. That's funny, but my story's even more gross. I've always had long hair, and I've always put in some product. So, talking like early 20s, about 10 or so years ago, a little more. I would sit on the bed of my parents' house every day, have my laptop, and I would just work. And I would sit against the wall, it's my TV. So, just my bed is this way, my TV is this way. So I'd sit up against this wall on a blue painted wall, light blue, like lighter than this, totally sky blue. Well, from all the product in my head, just sitting like this, it created this dark black, like blotch, like a nebulous cloud of hair gel. Then for whatever reason, my college days, I just didn't care. So I never washed it off. And it just sticky. So like when I'm pulling my hair up after several years, because it literally was sticky. So yours is funny, mine is gross.
But like the bottom of our shower is still purple because I like touched it up last night. It's like
oh, she just doesn't know yet.
She has
Okay. I painted the thing purple.
I got bored and I was doing my history worksheet and I was like, my hair needs to be touched up, so I was doing it. I read some guys.
That's exactly what I think when I do history worksheets. My hair, I'm talking about the Revolutionary War. Trying to fix this. Oh, righty then. Did I just take all of your time? You guys come over here? Okay. Well, it distracts. All right, so what is the most important branch of your government? Just go ahead and show me, give me a show of hands. Show your hands, Janae. Executive branch, who says executive branch is the most powerful or most important branch of government? Executive. Okay, you're the only one, so you're gonna have to tell me, why is the executive branch most important? I said powerful, I meant important.
I don't know, because they execute laws.
Thank God they don't execute people yet. Yeah, they execute laws. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, Congress passes a law, obviously the president has to sign it, then the president can just go, and it's not like, some representative from Delaware can just run around this country going, you're supposed to be doing, we told you so. Yeah, it's important that the president enforcing the laws. It's a really big deal because presidents will decide too not to enforce. That's the other thing. Consider marijuana. Marijuana is still to this day what's a class whatever narcotic. It's still a federally illegal drug. Technically, states like Arizona that pass laws that say no, it's legal are breaking federal law. Presidents just decide not to enforce. It is up to the Department of Justice, who is under the purview of the president, to enforce the federal law, and they just don't. The Congress obviously doesn't care either, and nobody really seems to in federal power. But regardless, presidents can decide not to enforce, and that's like, okay, now what? So whereas if the president enforced, it would force the Congress to act. It would either force the Congress to make it nationally legal or pass a law that said it is officially up to the states, or pass a law that says it, reaffirm the law. So the fact that the federal government, via the President, Department of Justice, does not enforce it, it really sets the precedent that the president can decide what's enforceable and enforceable. So it's what makes it very, very important. Who said the legislative branch is the most important branch of government? So 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, good. Some hands are coming up. Janae, what did you guys say? What did you say? Prove those people you're going to hear in your blog wrong. Podcast.
So we were just talking about how, like, the president, like, especially now, like, past couple of presidencies, they do these executive orders and they do have power, but in the end, doesn't Congress still have the power to, like, veto certain bills and, like, overpower those?
No, so technically the president vetoes a bill. The Congress, so in regards to executive orders, let's say for the sake of argument, Biden signed one that just renamed the days of the week. Let's just pick something stupid. Technically, the Congress could then pass a law to kind of like negate his executive order. The thing though is that he could veto that bill. So then the Congress would need to override the veto, and they need 2/3 of each house to override. Or is it 50%? Actually, it happens very, very frequently. It happened once to Trump. It was like the very last bill that Congress sent to Trump. He vetoed it, and Congress overrode it. But otherwise, it's just super, super rare. So that they could do it that way. But otherwise, when a president passes an executive order, unless somebody sues, it just kind of it has the teeth. It has the strength of law, but just not the longevity. Because the next president could just say, nope, throwing that out, and all of a sudden it's just over, just ends like that. So, but legislatively, you're still saying over them. The fact that they're the ones that are supposed to be the ones to pass the law, that's what makes them most important. And they can't override a presidential veto. Okay, so I've heard from 9 of you guys basically via hands, so then I would assume I'm going to see about 20 hands for the judicial branch. Supreme Court's most important. Some of you aren't voting. That's normal. I guess if you think of the 1996 presidential election, 49% of the nation, I think it was like 47% of the nation voted. This past election, people are psyched. 66% of the country voted. Yeah, the most ever is like 81. So we didn't break any records there. Okay, so who said judicial Supreme Court? What did you guys say?
I'm a huge advocate for the judicial court because, like, you can go through the executive, you can get a law passed with the legislature, whatever. Nothing actually goes, like, there's no repercussions until it gets to the judicial. Because if they say, like, we don't actually think this is constitutional, all that goes away.
Yeah.
Like, nothing's actually in effect, there's no change. All of that hard work from the judicial and executive just out the window.
That's true. Yeah, they are the arbiter. And when that does happen, again, it doesn't happen very frequently that a congressional law that is signed by the president gets overturned by the Supreme Court. It does happen. But then when that does happen, it's up to the Congress to then rewrite their law based on the recommendation of the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court will generally say it is unconstitutional because of this. So then the Congress then will say, okay, well, we'll rewrite the law because we obviously want this to happen, and then we'll fix it based on it's. A perfect example is you do a paper here at school, you get something wrong. Your teacher or professor hands it back to you and says, make this correction, I'll give you full credit. You make the correction, give it back, you get full credit. That's kind of like what happens with the Supreme Court. So the Congress will say, here's a law. The Supreme Court will say, well, no, you can't because of this. So the Congress will make a correction. And then while they never physically handed it to the Supreme Court in the first place, the fact that it doesn't get back to the Supreme Court is just, in essence, the Supreme Court saying, good job, you've made your corrections, here's full credit. And that's then when that law basically becomes eternal. Very good. All right, so our next assignment, I know you just turned one yesterday, but you have another one due in 13 days. You have time. It's very simple. So this is called The Evolution of Democracy in Early Republic. It's just another worksheet. It's all it is, just 3 questions. First one is you are to compare and contrast Jefferson's democracy with Jackson's democracy. We're going to get into that on Thursday or next Tuesday. I forget. We dive like headlong into that here soon. And so, what are Jefferson and Jackson's respective backgrounds? Whom did each believe should participate in the democratic process and/or hold public office? So that one is 350, 500 words. Then the next 2 questions. Number 2, explain 3 ways democracy changed or expanded from the time of Jefferson to Jackson. And then 3, identify 1 way democracy can be improved or continue to grow today. How can it be done? Each of those need to be 350 to 500 words. So that third one tends to be a lot of fun. That's really solely opinion. You just have to find a way in which democracy is somehow being restricted today in America, and then you explain how it can be fixed. And all 3 have to remain cited. Again, you always have to have a minimum of 1 citation per answer, 3 to 5 individual citations total. And so it's straightforward, no new rules or anything like that. Any questions, comments, concerns, facial twitches about this one? Okay, then here's the chapter reading, the skimming. This is great for the first 2. So the third one, you will have to come up with something else and find a citation for it in our general list of citations. But this one will be really good. This chapter reading will be really good for the first 2 questions. Here's some additional sources you can use as well. I mean, pretty simple stuff. The American Constitution, documentary record, Constitution of the United States from the National Archives, and the Federalist Papers. And finally, if you're interested in the topics that we discussed today, here's some books, documentaries, movies, and video games, which you can reference and learn about. First one is Washington Alive. This is a single volume biography of George Washington written by Ron Chernow. If you are a book reader, and if you enjoy history and kind of find fathers, this book is amazing. It's a very easy read. It's 600 pages, so it'll take you some time. But it's also not homework, so it'll take your time. But it is fantastic. I'll be quoting stuff about him from this book on Thursday. So actually, yeah, Jackson is next week. Book Ratification of the People to Make the Constitution. And then America was Strong, Conservative Ideas to Spark the Next Generation. In terms of documentaries, if you haven't seen it, America, the Story of Us, I'll be referencing that next week as well. The Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers. And then Brad Meltzer's Decoded, the Declaration of Independence. That one's on YouTube right now. It's amazing. I'll have a great time. And the documentaries, documentaries that I reference are usually never more than an hour and a half long. I mean, generally about an hour long. In terms of movies, if you've never seen The Patriot, Mel Gibson, great movie. National Treasure is Nicolas Cage, great movie. National Treasure 2 is okay. The original, if you've never seen it, fantastic. And then John Adams' HBO series. It's an 8-episode what do they call it? Biopic, I guess, or whatever, about John Adams. HBO, it's fantastic. And then video games of this era, Assassin's Creed 3, if you've never played that, great game. Birth of America and Liberty or Death, which is on the SNES. So if you're a 16-bit fan like I am, Liberty or Death, Birth of America and Liberty or Death are not RPGs, they're strategy games. I would just take that for other. All right, so, okay. Abigail, Adelina, Amber,
Here.
Andrew, Ashley,
Here.
Ferguson or,
Osage.
okay, pronounce it. Osage. Okay, thank you. I don't know if I've actually heard you say it before. Avery,
Here.
Berkeley. No. Blake, Brian, Brooklyn, Camilla, Carter, Dawson Lane, Dawson Mitch, DeMarcus, Demetrius. Did I hear here? Yeah. Okay. Goes by a lot faster when there's nobody here. Erica, Emily.
Here.
Here. Estefani. No. Evan. No. Frederick. Jabby. Haley.
Here.
Hannah.
Here.
Isabella.
Here.
Jamie.
Here.
Jamie. Janae is absent. Jesse.
Here.
Joella.
Here.
John. Is that Crispy or Davis? Davis. Is Crispy here? Not Crispy? No. Joseph. Julia.
Here.
Here. Kenna.
Here.
Carissa.
Here.
Kiani. Laura.
Here.
Here. Lori. Leslie.
Here.
Mackenzie. No. Mary. Matthew.
Here.
Matthew Henry. Is Matthew Moore here? No. Marilyn. Michael.
Here.
Michaela. Morgan. Nancy. Nathan. Nathaniel.
Here.
Nick. Nick or Nicholas? I thought he was here. Lauren. Peyton. Raina.
Here.
Samantha. Savannah. Neither Samantha's here, correct? Seth. Sydney. Sophia. Tanner. Taylor.
Here.
Taylor.
Here.
Tyler.
Here.
Vanessa.
Here.
Okay, I got you. Anybody, questions, comments, questions for me? I love you all. Have a great week. I'll see you on Thursday video, and then I'll see you in person on Tuesday. Maybe 1 second.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so you texted me last night at 11 something. I was doing homework. Hannah? Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, so I know it's not my best work, I'm not, yeah, I don't wanna do.
I don't want to rush. I won't rush.
Yeah.
So, you said which one was it?
The last night, I didn't finish it on time, I know.
Okay, oh, so it's two last, okay, you're fine. So how much time? Just start. When it's done, get it
Yeah, no,
done.
I don't wanna turn something so fast.
Perfect, I don't want to have fast.
Okay.
Right, not rush. You're the best, thank you.
So, I can do the rest on site and then have my worksheet. If I want to.
Done.
Thank you.
I just gonna get a second, so what's wrong?
I have no idea. It just might stop working. Start screen just went, or I can static.
It went static?
Yeah, I didn't know why, but I have that. And then command started going to
I did. You got it back on. to just sink it to the type.
Okay, no, I have.
Student union. At least it used to. Yeah, give them a shot first. I'm pretty sure they'll fix up all kinds of stuff. And if not, then, yeah, they don't make the best buy. Yeah, but yeah, try to get a person student union, for sure. So student union like second floor. They used to transport for something. Yeah, yep, not a problem. What states? Well, actually, I meant like position. Nice, top one. How are you? Yeah. Are you playing here?
I was on my mission.
Oh. Sweet. Oh, thank you, man.
This is like old.
D-Max did a good third base. So.
I actually,
Here's what?
he plays with us.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's in the organization, or is he?
He's what's his name? David Bodie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My wife's a huge Cubs fan, so I'm not.
Yeah, we know him. But he told me that it's over there.
Oh, what's your name? Shut this up.